I did a first impression video on Metaphor Refantazio about a month ago, and the main points I said was that, at least from the first few hours, it was so far looking very promising. Visually, it looks amazing from the UI to the world environment to the character designs. It looks top notch, and clearly a lot of effort was put into the presentation of the game. Yes, the game functionally plays very similar to the Persona series, but it's set in a whole new environment and world. Rather than being a student in like Tokyo, you are now part of an election to become the king of Uchronia. My journey through Uchronia took nearly 70 hours, and it was the best 70 hours I ever had. I have a hard time thinking of any bad things about the game, where it's like very small nitpicky points that don't really affect my overall experience. And I truly believe that this is a very strong Game of the Year contender. The story for this game is amazing. The problem with long games like this, which is probably going to take people like 60 plus hours to complete, is the pacing of the game. If it's inconsistent, then it's hard to follow along. If it's too consistent, then it gets very predictable and stale very fast. And at least to me, the pacing was as perfect as it can be. There's many twists and turns that made it very exciting and made me just want to sacrifice some sleep just to play more. Metaphor takes place in a fantasy world where many different tribes and races live in Uchronia. Some of these tribes are oppressed, some of them are thriving, and others where they're just basically extinct. It's a horrible time and place to live, and so when the current king was assassinated by a very popular man named Luis, who is an officer of the royal army, and not someone you want to mess with, and also with the prince, who is assumed dead, but is actually still alive, but very close to dying as he's enshrouded by like some dark curse, this would cause the nation into disarray with no one to take the throne. The king might have anticipated this, as with his death, a royal magic was put into place where essentially, the people of Uchronia would elect the candidate that they want to become ruler. And this is where you come in as the player. As the prince's best friend, you are one of the many few who know that the prince is still alive, so you join the election in order to gain the popular votes of all Uchronia, so then you can put the prince on the throne as he has this like very righteous vision of the utopia he would always talk about. And I'm purposely leaving a lot of gaps in my summary because there's a lot that happens in between. But ultimately, you then journey around the nation trying to get people to essentially vote for you. I mean, the premise of an election in a game is something that I've never really played before, and that got me intrigued. That, along with seeing and trying to solve many social and political issues, was so cool to witness. It's very apparent, even in the beginning at the capital city, you see issues like religion issues, racism, disparity of the rich and poor, and just prejudice in general. And it tackles and explains these issues in a very natural and meaningful way that I really enjoyed. It never felt preachy or in your face. It showed, I guess, the reality of this fantasy world, and trying to change it into this idea of utopia that you read about in this book you carry on everywhere could be too hard to carry out. Almost like another fantasy world in itself. And so I appreciated that the game respects the player, knows that what is morally right and wrong, and doesn't dwell on trying to teach or lecture you into these ideals. They made some of the villains likable and relatable, even if they were batshit crazy. The Memorandum is a great addition, and I wish more and more games do keep adding a feature like this. It's essentially like a glossary that keeps expanding based on how much of the world you know. You can look at this almost at any point in the game, except for cutscenes, I think. So if someone references something about Magla or something, you can quickly pause the dialogue, open it up, and quickly read about it. Each entry is short and sweet and very useful. Especially for me, it's way easier for me to get invested into the story if I understand concepts and keywords for massive lore-based games like this. I can pause it, look at the dialogue logs, read the memorandum, and have a very clear understanding of what's going on. I know games are starting to incorporate things like this, like Final Fantasy 16, I think had something like this. Star Rail as well, but nothing as good as Metaphor. This is, probably to me, the standard and goal that all RPGs should strive for. The characters are great. I've only played Persona 5 and Persona 3 Reload from Atlus, but they've just nailed every single character design, and Metaphor is no exception. Every single character is amazing, whether it's down to the design, their personality, their impact on the overall story, their voice acting. It feels like, as like they did with Persona, they put a lot of effort into these, and they are very unique, that they don't feel like a derivative of another character from a different game. And there are so many characters. From party members like Stroll and Hulkenberg, to big political figures like Forden and Louise, and to followers like Maria and Brigitte. They're all so cool. And bonus points for me, that they all look very unique, and their designs still look like they belong in this game and don't look slightly out of place. An example would be like Lloyd from Tales of Symphonia being oddly out of place. These characters are so good in metaphor that it's kind of a shame that there's no romance in this game. Maybe in the sequel, Hulkenberg. Maybe in the sequel. As I said before, the voice acting in this game is amazing. Also, unlike in Persona games, and also in other JRPGs similar to this, I appreciated the fact that the protagonist is not silent. We're still given choices, albeit the typical illusion of free choice, but just like in Star Rail, some of these choices are very funny, or serious, or whatever, and still feel appropriate even if they don't amount to anything. For me at least, it's a good spot to check up to make sure I understand everything, and since the protagonist is voiced, it doesn't interrupt the flow of the conversation. I hope more and more games do this, as I honestly think silent protagonists are pointless, especially if it's a pre-made character. If it's a fully customizable character, like in Baldur's Gate 3 for example, then I'm okay with the silent protagonist. But for games like Persona, the protagonist has no need to be silent. One nitpick I have is that not all of the dialogue in Metaphor is voiced. Now, there's a lot of lines in Metaphor, and it would be near impossible to have it entirely 100% voiced. But I do think they could have prioritized things a bit better, such as having all the social links being voiced, rather than just the last rank. Again, it's a nitpick. That doesn't greatly affect my experience with the game, but it's worth noting. The graphics are also really, really good. Not only did they do a good job with the character designs, but they also did a really good job in portraying it of how beautiful Ukronia is. Each major city is decently sized, and are all unique from each other. My favorite city is probably still the capital city, but the other cities that you will visit are still really, really good. Not only that, but also when you're traveling to the next destination, whether that's a city or quest or whatever, you could take a pit stop real quick to see a very cool view or landmark in your travels. These sites are really, really good. You better get your screenshot button ready, because they are so cool and really breathes life into the world. And even better, your party members even explain its history or relevance of it in your journey, whether it's something just like a cool fun fact or just poking fun of a party member like Hulkenberg. Just like I mentioned in my first impressions video, the game functions very, very similar to Persona. Once I got through the long intro sequence and was able to get into the daily routine, so to speak, it was basically like Persona 5 and I immediately knew what to do. Those who played Persona 5 will probably feel the same way as I do. Gotta build up my royal virtues, gain more followers, progress in the main quest, and whatnot. And even if you haven't played Persona 5 before, I think you'll be fine, as there's not that many options to do before the first deadline, so you shouldn't feel like you're missing out on content. And like Persona, your options of activities increase more as you progress through the game. A quick explanation for people who don't play Persona: your activities will work around a calendar, essentially. By June 21st, so 10 days, you must complete the main quest or else you get a game over and you may have to potentially be restarted back like 3 days or something. But 10 days is more than plenty of time to complete the quest. The real question is, what else are you willing to do? Each day is broken into a day and night, and you can do a variety of activities such as hanging out with party members, embarking out on a side quest, talking to townsfolk to increase personal stat points, or just anything of note. Anything marked with a clock will then change day to night, or night to the next day. Some activities only available at night, some during the day, and when embarking on a side quest or main quest dungeon, you can only start it during the day and it counts as both your day and night activity, making planning very, very essential, especially if you're the type of person that want to min-max everything or wanting to fully experience all the content presented to you. The combat is also very similar to the Persona series. It's turn-based with a few added elements. It's different enough from the Persona series to a point that I actually prefer this over Persona. For example, there's party formation where you can move your characters further back to take less damage or further forward to deal more damage. There's also like a combo skill attack that you do with party members depending on their archetype, and archetypes act like jobs in this game. So technically, anyone can be your healer or tank or DPS or whatever. You have more freedom in team comps and character builds than something that you would see in the Persona series. I loved the archetypes and being able to be more creative with my team comps and character builds. In my first impressions video, one of my concerns was how slow the progression might be in acquiring these different archetypes and just leveling up in general. And after playing the entire game, I had the opposite. I wish I had more time in maxing out all of these archetypes, as some of the requirements to, I guess, evolve these archetypes needed some proficiency in other archetypes, which required some planning, but that was cool and fun to do. I didn't get to max out the archetypes I wanted to in the end, but that just gives me a goal to do for a New Game Plus run whenever I get around to it. So yeah, my worries about progression were quelled. I think the way the game handles progression and pacing is done very, very well. I just hope that it introduced heroic archetypes a bit sooner, as those requirements are kind of absurd for how late in the game they're introduced. Don't look it up, you'll be spoiled. But that's really my only complaint, and I would consider it a nitpick. Metaphor Refantazio is an amazing game. It was my most anticipated game, and I had high expectations for this game, and it somehow exceeded each of them. The premise of the game is something I've really never done in other games, trying to be elected into being the new ruler of the land of Uchronia, all while experiencing many different social issues that are handled with so much care and attention. It feels very natural and belongs in this fantasy world. Everything in this game feels immersive and just wants to grab you and pull you into the fantasy world. From the amazing characters, the lore, the music, the art style, the UI, the combat, like everything about this game is top notch. Yes, this game functions similarly to the Persona series, but its differences and substantial enough to differentiate itself from it. And honestly, I love Metaphor's combat much more than Persona's. Everything is done right with this game, and it's really hard to find anything that I didn't find enjoyable or didn't work. Metaphor Refantazio is a standout JRPG, and not only will most likely be my game of the year, it could be my favorite game of all time. Thank you for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe to this video if you like this type of content. I plan on streaming my playthrough of the Dragon Quest remake when it comes out next week, so it would be cool to see some of you guys pop in and say hello. Leave a comment down below, and come join the Discord in the link below that I'm active in. See you guys later.